My name is John Derrick. I'm a screenwriter in Hollywood, where I write stories for TV. During the war, I was a press officer in the U.S. Air Corps. In April 1943, at the request of the Propaganda Division, I launched an operation called Liberty Lily. 15 years went by, but I never managed to put my war years behind. They were a painful memory I had steadfastly refused to discuss. Then, a short while back, a TV producer asked me to tell him about the Liberty Lily. Wasn't it time I finally paid tribute to my men? So I opened up what I call my blues box, and all the memories came rushing back. Ever since Pearl Harbor was bombed, the U.S. had been fighting on every front in Europe and Asia. The losses were getting heavier by the day. The armed forces were running out of troops. The situation had grown serious. Washington's generals called an emergency meeting. How could they lift the morale of Americans who had come to think the war would never end? They even got President Roosevelt involved. Everybody had his own idea about what to do. I was part of the U.S. Army's movie propaganda division. The project fell into our laps and caught my interest. I decided to take up the challenge and told them about my idea. I suggested we man a bomber with a crew selected to reflect the country's diversity. Poles, Italians, Germans, Irish. Then we'd film them carrying out a series of missions to show the American people what we were fighting for. They liked the idea. I suggested we name the plane the Liberty. Liberty, a good word for rousing American public opinion. The bomber's crew was carefully handpicked. Every American family could identify with one of the young crew members and think, he can do it too. He'll make it through. The president insisted we highlight each man's background. Were they married? What kind of work did they do? We would show slices of their lives to make America identify with them and forge a true bond. The Pentagon made me use Gary, the son of wealthy Senator Hart. The daredevil with friends in high places would be the Liberty's pilot. He was a skirt chaser who loved to gamble, a crackerjack acrobat. He looked the part of the handsome American hero. Now all he had to do was to learn how to fly a B-17. Tony Vaccaro was an Italian from New York. He was a first-rate mechanic who'd spent his youth souping up the engines of stolen cars. Jim Darty, our bombardier, was married to a Hollywood starlet. You're sure to recognize her in this picture since she went on to make a big career at Fox. Sam, the navigator, was a cartoonist with Disney. He was a German-American who'd fled persecution by the Nazis. And Kowalski, the Polish gunner, was a slaughterer in a Chicago slaughterhouse. As for the man we called the Indian, he was a mystery even to us. He would sit in the hellish and most dangerous position under the plane. I didn't know these men yet, but it was my job to turn them into heroes. As the days went by, I would grow to appreciate each one. In mid-April 1943, the crew went to England. They were greeted with amused curiosity. I was eager to see them take off on their first mission. The men were left to their own devices, and England was rife with temptations, especially for Vaccaro, who fell in love at the drop of a hat. A pretty smile or the brush of a hand would send him spooning. He was a romantic. 2 weeks later, they got their first chance. A mission to a maritime base in France. The crew was jumping with joy, but they had no idea just how brutal the mission would be on them. An escort would go along to protect the mission and make it easier to film. Our cameraman, William Chomsky, would get his first shots. We had worked together during the Great Depression in Oklahoma. He'd also jumped into the fire of the Spanish War alongside Hemingway. In Spain, he met photographer Robert Capa, who knew better than anyone else that truth is the best picture. Chomsky knew how to paint and sculpt human faces. We needed his skills to make Gary's character look tougher. A happy-go-lucky childhood had made him a bit of a softie. William would film the men's faces with a handheld camera, but we would attach several cameras under the plane to capture the bombs dropping. As dawn cracked on May 12, 1943, reveille sounded in the Liberty Lily bunkhouse, just like it did for the Memphis Belle. Kowalski was the first one up. Gary, the pilot, huddled into his covers. The scene was edited out of the film, not exactly a heroic moment. Some of the men couldn't eat, others were famished. The tension showed on their faces. At 6:30 a.m., I saw 80 pairs of still drowsy but attentive eyes at Colonel Bradley's briefing.
Gentlemen, this is the real thing. This is the first operational mission we're going on.
The target was identified, Sanna's airport.
Is RP-9X-55.
Gas tanks were filled, mechanics loaded the bombs, then checked the oxygen masks and machine guns. Gary Hart, Vaccaro, Friedman, Kowalski, Doherty. I could tell they were nervous. How were they going to do? It would be the first time they dropped a bomb. Would they keep their cool? Finally, at 8 a.m., I told them goodbye and good luck. I was as edgy as they were. I decided that Tony Vaccaro would be the first one we filmed. Tony was a fighter. He'd wanted to be a boxer. He'd come in second at the junior championship in Madison Square Gardens. He dreamed of making the big time. I happened to see him boxing one day in camp. He hit hard, and his punches hurt. I chose him for the determined look on his face that said he wanted payback for what Mussolini had done to his loved ones. Poverty had driven his family from Palermo to try their luck in America. Poverty and fascism were eating away at the country. In New York, they fell in with the Sicilian clan. Tony became a streetwise card shark, a bit of a hooligan. He might even have done some time in jail. But the Army made a new man out of him. It tapped his talent for doing over stolen cars and turned him into a matchless technician. He filled the role for which he'd been cast perfectly, the role of the well-integrated Italian fighting for our country. That was the story that accompanied the footage I sent to Army headquarters. When the anti-aircraft defense started firing, they got their baptism by fire. But they flew so high, nothing could possibly hit them. That's what the film said, at least. And I promised American families a bloodless, victimless war. But the real story would be another thing altogether. The bombing of Saint-Nazaire was a success, and the pictures William brought back were magnificent. The crew said the beauty of the bombs exploding gave them chills. The stars shooting out from the anti-aircraft guns like fireworks, the flames creeping out over the ground. The satisfaction of a job well done. On the way back, the tension finally eased up. Did they have any thoughts for the French civilians who had been buried under the rubble? They had done substantial damage. I came across this forgotten reel of footage not too long ago. Doherty is on the right, and look, there is Sam Friedman on the left. This shot isn't in the film. I censored it. Their faces didn't betray the slightest bit of regret. We waited impatiently for the mission to return. The names of planes were called off, one after the other. Then, the Liberty Lily finally landed. We filmed this scene twice. The Liberty had to be the last plane to touch down to heighten the tension over their return in the film. The crew was delighted with the way we'd staged it. Gary gave a little wave. Kowalski improvised this short scene. And the pictures shot by William were all top quality. We were off to a good start. A crew had been born. The men had forged tight bonds, a close-knit group that complemented each other well, a reflection of America. I immediately sent off the film reels to the Pentagon, along with the remarks I'd written about each one. Now, I had to wait for the verdict. That night, I gave them some time off. They decided to go to a village pub called the Swan and Castle. I didn't keep them any longer. They all went off with Tony, who had an idea in his head. Everyone went, except Friedman. He wanted to finish writing a letter to his wife, Pat. I started up a conversation. Did everything go well up there? He felt like talking. He'd gotten married right before he joined the army. His wife was in New York. Talking about Sam still makes me choke up, even today. Can you tell he was my favorite? Maybe because his life had been so tragic. He told me he was from a Jewish family from Berlin. When Hitler came to power, they fled to America. Ellis Island, the Island of Tears. His father never adjusted to living in exile. He felt like he'd left his entire life behind. Sam, on the other hand, dreamed of a new world. Something's finally happening in my life, he rejoiced. Sam enrolled in college. That's where he met Pat. But the war caught up with him just after his dream came true, landing a job as a cartoonist with Disney. The Pentagon had given me his file. Sam Friedman was the perfect embodiment of the New York Jew. Army Command finally approved the footage and okayed my first portraits. We began filming all the crew members, one after the other. we would paint a heroic picture of America at war. They flew mission after mission over France. The days went by, peppered with breaks when bad weather grounded the planes and flopped the pilots down on the ground. In June 1943, I heard rumors that made me believe our plane was going to see action over Germany. Their first incursion into the heart of the Third Reich. A weapons factory in the Happy Valley, as this part of the Ruhr region was called. Friedman, our navigator, would guide the plane to a target where hundreds of German civilians would be killed. Childhood friends, maybe even family. It was a tough task for him, one he would have preferred to skip.
They're coming in, Scotty. Save the ammunition as much as possible. Okay, here we are.
As they approached the German coast, an enemy fighter jet appeared. Everyone manned their post. Jim Doherty loaded his machine gun and started firing. The pungent odor of powder filled the plane. The noise was deafening. The cabin started shaking. Hunkered over his gun, Jim yelled over and over as he fired, imitating the sound of a cavalry charge. He'd always wanted to be the trumpeter who sounded the charge, the one who saved the besieged fort in westerns. It was his Hollywood dream come true. Doherty, he had been recommended to me by the Army's movie division. Hollywood was already interested in his young bride, Norma Jean. Jim was born into a farming family in Oklahoma. They lived off cotton and corn. That was back before the curse of the Dust Bowl, the destructive wind and dust storms that changed this verdant paradise into a desert. So they went out to California. That's where he met Norma Jean, who would later call herself Marilyn. Her story is already familiar to you. When she became rich and famous, she kept anyone from seeing these pictures of her younger self. She was a little lost back then, pretending to be Clark Gable's daughter. She was a 15-year-old girl with mascara on her lashes, lipstick on her pout, and a great big bust. A photographer noticed her at a Boeing plant where she was washing airplane engines. She explained that putting a pretty girl in coveralls was just as sexy as dressing her in a magnificent body-hugging gown. The photo they took that day made the cover of the Army magazine, Yank. That's when Hollywood came calling. Jim and Norma's love story had made us pick him for our mission. Gary had climbed to a higher altitude to avoid ground fire. The squadron continued on its way to the Karlsruhe factory. Friedman's face was bathed in sweat. Was it from fear? Leaning over his gyroscope, Doherty waited for Friedman's signal. Heavy clouds covered Germany in a vast blanket. The plane was flying at 30,000 feet. Friedman announced the position, but Doherty couldn't see the target. His heart was pounding faster and faster. A hole suddenly appeared between the clouds. Jim released the bombs. They never knew what happened to the civilians they bombed that day in the Happy Valley. From this altitude, you can't see much. just a burnt smell that snuck into the cockpit and reminded them it was a real mission, but didn't put a human face on it. At 30,000 feet, people no longer exist. But Friedman had miscalculated his position, so Doherty missed the target. I never knew if Friedman made that mistake on purpose. But he did tell me this: I missed the target, but I may have saved a poem, a song, a love letter. Maybe I spared the life of a Bach or a Goethe. It may be the best thing I've ever done in my entire life. A red light started flashing. The plane was running out of gas. But with a little luck, they could make the English coast. What do men say at times like these, when they could crash any second? They fall silent. The plane throbbed with fear. Everyone prayed and avoided the other's gaze. Everyone, Catholic, Protestant, or Jew, believes in something at times like these. The plane kept flying high to avoid a surprise attack. The cold air gnawed at them, the air filled with mist, their fingers frozen. Kowalski dozed off, and memories came rushing back. The cold, the biting cold of a Polish winter. The Kowalskis were among the millions of immigrants who poured in from Europe without a trade or skill. The U.S. was still reeling for the 1929 crash. In Chicago, factories were closing. A nickel bought them a glass of milk and a bowl of soup. Little by little, thanks to everyone's hard work, their hopes were rekindled. Father Kowalski found work in factories. His son followed behind. They did the jobs Americans didn't want. Kowalski was a cutter on factory boats, a slaughterer in Chicago's slaughterhouses. Then he went into the mines, 60 meters underground. He was one robust guy. With a sledgehammer or a machine gun, Kowalski felt right at home. I needed a firm-handed guy, a Catholic Pole. I hired him. The squadron's airplanes landed one after the other, but there was no news of the Liberty Lily. About 10 minutes later, a call came into the base. British command informed us that the bomber had rerouted towards one of their landing strips. The Liberty had sent out an SOS, which they'd picked up. A few hours later, they finally saw ground again, lit up by the lights on the emergency runway, like a beacon in the night. They were home safe. I was relieved. Our project could go on. How was the film coming together? We'd seen fighting and tears, but something was still missing. That unexpected twist that turns a life into a destiny. Maybe we'd find it next time. Darling, I'm thousands of miles away from you, and I'm writing to tell you how much I love you. Don't ever stop believing that I'll come back to you one day safe and sound, because we were made for each other. Tony, Jim, John, and Sam wrote the same letter every day. Thousands of letters to breach the aching distance between two people who used their words to try and stop the downward spiral of lives that had lost all meaning. Women were their favorite topic of conversation, and they quashed their fear by grabbing every instant of joy they could. By now, my men had become part of America's daily life. I'd won my bet, but the Pentagon kept asking for more and more footage. War correspondents were fighting to come aboard the Liberty. Everyone wanted to get the heroic story and find new men to praise on the front pages, even dead ones. And so one morning, I got a phone call saying that Rhett Butler was coming to see me. Clark Gable was going to join us for a special mission. In his picture-perfect uniform, the hero of Gone with the Wind looked like he'd just stepped out of the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer costume department. I'd met him before the war back in Hollywood. I was one of the legion of screenwriters MGM hired to polish the script of Gone with the Wind. My sole contribution to the film was this one line.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Go to hell. The Gable operation was all I'd hoped for. With him on board, my film would get out to the general public we wanted to reach. As the hundreds of journalists who flocked in looked on, he gave the crew an elocution lesson. Do what you were picked to do. Smile, he told them. That pretty much summed up his acting technique.
Last night, I met the girl of my dreams.
Our time with Gable were the happiest days of our war. During the day, the crew risked their lives in the air. At night, they painted the town with Rhett Butler. In the packed Saturday nightclubs, Clark's entrance was announced with a drum roll. And all the bewitched women came running. Everyone grabbed a spark of Gable's glory to impress the one-night Scarlets who crowded around them. But then, May 23, 1944 cracked and became a day they would remember better than their own birthdays. Their target was an aircraft assembly plant. It was a highly dangerous mission. Clark would come along. Despite the risks, he volunteered straight away. They had to push back the departure time so Gable could hold a press conference. The media stir would be a boon for our mission. One by one, the men climbed aboard. Vaccaro, Doherty, Friedman, Kowalski, Seaborn, and Gary, the pilot. At 11:35 a.m., the planes took off. The Liberty led the pack, so the film could show Gable as the squadron leader. An hour later, the crew was jostled out of its torpor by a deafening racket. An attack? No. It was just Gable firing off wild bursts of machine gun blasts. They all understood that William was filming the Hollywood star in action. Ever a pro, every time the camera zeroed in on him, Gable screwed up his eyes with determination. It was going to make a nice sequence.
There's 6 o'clock up, coming in, diring out, Chief.
B-17 in trouble on 2 o'clock, watching.
But that day, the danger didn't come from a German fighter. Gary was speechless with fright as a gigantic black figure rushed in on them. A violent shock. One of the squadron's B-17s had just hit the Liberty Lily. The plane was shaking. Cries of fear rang out in the cabin. What's happened? What's our altitude? Jump! Gary yelled. One engine was on fire. Gary cut it. The plane steadied out. Luckily, the crew hadn't jumped, apart from one man, the Indian, and his parachute didn't open. His name was John Seaborn. I hardly knew him. He was the most mysterious member of the crew. But what I found out about him after the war made me even more fond of him. Now, whenever I look at the Empire State Building, I think of Seaborn. He came from a place where men did high-risk jobs. Lots of Indians, lots of fearless men. He had a tremendous thirst for adventure. He joined a circus. He learned how to sail on a trapeze from Connie, whom he married during his stint in Reno. But an accident put an end to his acrobat days. He worked as a clown and an animal trainer. He earned a reputation as a death dodger. Had he created several different versions of his own life? Some say his name didn't have anything to do with his origins, but that he'd got it while working in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show when it crossed paths with the circus. He had replaced a stuntman, and that's when he got the name Sitting Bull the Indian. When he followed Gary's signal and jumped, the Indian took his final death-defying plunge. He returned to the land of his ancestors, 22,000 feet below. William Chomsky was the Indian's last spectator. He laid there for several long minutes. The Indian had been his friend. He knew he had purposely not opened his parachute. He knew that some men would rather die than be captured, and the Indian was one of them. We got an order to dump our bombs. The mission was called off. Gary started to mechanically take roll call. Vaccaro, present. Doherty, present. Kowalski, present. Friedman. Friedman didn't answer. Friedman was dead. A piece of shrapnel had pierced his throat. The crew gathered round, then each one kissed him goodbye. He was certainly on his way to the lost pilot's heaven. Meanwhile, the Liberty Lily limped home like a giant wounded animal. It now looked like a gigantic grave. Luckily, the aircraft brought Clark Gable back safe and sound.
Lieutenant Bishop, sir.
Friedman was laid out on a stretcher, eyes wide open. As you've probably surmised, I loved him like a son. Gable left the same way he'd come. His mission was over. The pictures we'd shot would be seen around the world. One fine morning, in a fancy, well-ironed trench coat, Major Gable went back to Hollywood. I would never see him again, and, quite frankly, I didn't want to. I imagine he felt the same way. In 3 weeks' time, our squadron had lost 17 of its air crews. We knew that Air Force headquarters didn't have any choice but to keep throwing them into the inferno. But I could tell that the men were tired and depressed. They had just one thing on their minds now: staying alive. I'd already given the Pentagon enough footage to make a powerful propaganda film. One more death wouldn't make the legend any stronger. So I decided to cut the program short. I tried to convince my superiors we needed to pull out quickly. I showed Army Command the last shots we'd brought back. Of Gable, of course, to win them over, but also of Sam Friedman to persuade them to end the Liberty Lily's mission before it became absolute carnage. The film was already looking good. They agreed. But I had to make one last concession. The Liberty would fly one last mission. A big operation was in the works, and they needed all available bombers to take part. For the final mission, I wanted to show my men what I was capable of. Or maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. I decided to take the place of our cameraman, William. The Indian's death had been a terrible shock for him. He had to be hospitalized.
I have your attention, please.
On the morning of May 19th, 1944, in the operation room at Base Command, the flight officer drew a line starting from a pin representing our base all the way to a remote point inside Germany. It would be, without a doubt, our defining mission.
Produce results, and our standard of performance is very high.
Berlin. Father Stork, the base chaplain who spent his days burying our dead, comforting our wounded, and bolstering the demoralized, whispered to us, "Make it living hell for them." The blessing of a man of the cloth was an invaluable boost for our mission. He stayed at our side as we readied for takeoff, reassuring or encouraging the men as needed. Every man slipped a final letter for his family into the chaplain's hand. Our plane was already in bad shape, with worn-out tires and holes in the cabin, making the fear just that much stronger. We'd repaired it as best as we could, but the machine guns sputtered and the doors jammed. It had been hit so many times, we started calling it the explosive vacuum. It was an odd-looking aircraft. Everyone had expressed himself in his own way. A life's important date, caricatures and poems carved into the cabin walls. It was a great big graffiti that was going to send the Germans a message straight out of hell. When the door closed behind us, it felt like we'd been trapped in a coffin. I finally got a taste of what my men had been living through for the past year. The air was heavy. We avoided each other's gaze. Who would be reported missing that night? men geared up to face their destiny. For the very first time, we were carrying tons of fire bombs. Pushed by the wind, their balls of fire would stretch out for miles. The phosphorus mortar shells were sure to create a magnificent sight. The air was growing thinner and thinner. Our hearts were beating faster and faster. We were so nervous, every jolt made us think, this is the end. Every man was mentally calculating his chances of survival against a sad statistic. How many pilots had made it through their 25 missions? After several hours of praying, the lights of a city suddenly pierced the night sky. Was it Berlin? The radio operator put the question to base command. Is that Berlin? But our urgent calls echoed into the void. Was our radio broken? Still uncertain, I gave the order to bomb the city. Was it really Berlin we had bombed? We didn't even know. The city was now one big firestorm. The raid would be the climax of the film, if the images were of high enough quality. Gary seemed to be in a trance, staring blankly into space. The airplane continued its way eastward. My mouth was dry, my knees were shaking. Why weren't we heading back? To what unknown destination was he taking us? Suddenly, a gunner yelled, "Enemy at 2 o'clock." And I saw them draw up to us. "Enemy at 9 o'clock. Enemy at 3 o'clock. Then the gunner started reporting aircraft all around us. Enemy fighter jets were bearing down on us like a swarm of bees. The Caro started singing at the top of his lungs. The navigator started praying. He'd sent us in the wrong direction. Gary had led the entire squadron headlong into the wave of German fighter jets that were chasing us. Doherty sounded the charge. Shaking wildly, another man cried out, "I'm gonna die!" Gary seemed indifferent to the danger. Had he kept his wits about him? I slid up to the cockpit, where he was wrestling with a control stick about to rip out of the floor. The bomber seemed to be spinning out of control. Men were tumbling out of their planes and flying through the air. Seats and machine guns were shooting out in every direction. On board, all communications went out. The extreme tension brought a heightened awareness that felt like a hallucination. Had we gone mad?
The tall man with the high hat will be coming down your way.
And then I woke back up. No B-17s in sight. We were all alone. An hour and a half after the attack began, a strange feeling came over me. We were still alive. We were flying over implausible snow-capped peaks. The plane seemed to be going around in circles. Sun to the east, sun to the west. What was going on? Was it a bad dream? Our guts were still churning from the violent combat. You could smell the fear in the air. In a matter of seconds, we had seen more than most people will ever see in an entire lifetime. Everything I'd written in the film commentary was a sham. I'd written that the men felt no fear, but that was far from the truth. With sweating, bloody bodies in the bitter air that smelled like cordite and death, my men were crying like babies. Dirty work. Dirty war. The hydraulic circuit had gone out. The brakes didn't work anymore. As we landed, many of us made the sign of the cross. God heard our prayers that day. After spinning around one last time, the airplane came to a halt at the end of the runway. 385 airplanes didn't make it back. At the debriefing, they told us that Berlin had indeed been bombed that day. I sent my footage on to Washington. No one had ever captured images that real before. The film Operation Liberty Lily was a great success. It gave Americans new cause for hope. In November 1944, the crew members were hailed as heroes at an Air Force base in Memphis, Tennessee. The film A Bomber Named Liberty Lily had created two full-scale heroes, and the crowd wanted to see them. It was a bit of a victory for me, but a bitter one. Friedman was dead, and the memory of the Indians still hovered over the crew. At the end of the ceremony, Gary came up to me. After a long silence, he asked me what would have happened if our plane had gone down on its last mission. We were no longer bound by any pacts, had no obligation to preserve secrecy. So I told him the truth. Another B-17, named the Memphis Belle, had been doing the same work with William Wyler since the operation first started. With great embarrassment, I admitted to him that we would have simply changed the title of the film. As the story came to an end, I closed my memory box. There were tears in my eyes.
I don't give a damn.
I made up my mind. I wouldn't accept the offers from Hollywood. This was one story I wouldn't tell. But perhaps one day I'll finally get around to writing the true story of the Liberty Lily.